We interrupt this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
Hello. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are listening to Damn Radio. I'm coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. Oh my, the news. Feel free to call me 573-746-8020 and get ready because I believe after the Thanksgiving holiday that I think I'm going to be going straight into the morning hour, 7:30 to 9 o'clock. We shall see what shall be seen, and it'll be very exciting. So all the news today, at least this evening, has been all about the 28-point plan. So last night I talked a little bit about what it was, but nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew. Well, now people know. It's been leaked, of course, which nothing could ever be just put out by the proper, I don't know what, proper source, maybe, would be the old president, would be somebody somewhere in the government, but it's always leaked. And this was leaked. Somehow, Axios got it, and then there were, but everybody was talking about it anyway. Like, they had seen it, they had read it, but they didn't have it, and they couldn't talk about it. Last night, there were some people, I went through a good number of shows today, and was seeing what various people were saying, both in Russia, all over the world. I read an Al Jazeera piece that was pretty cool, that was talking about whether or not we were going to see the end of a war anytime soon. And I did like the way they framed some of the questions, because for me, it's... I think it's important. In fact, here I am sitting in the Real Estate of the Art Studio, and they're showing, on JR's TV stuff, going to be distracting me. I think I'm going to shut them off, drive me crazy. But they're various different people saying different things about the peace plan. And I've been talking about the corruption scandal in Ukraine for a while. That dude's on his last legs. And I thought I would start with the golden toilet, right? So I don't know if you guys have paid attention to this, but the golden toilets of Ukraine are all over Telegram. I don't know that I've shared them before, but there's an article by a guy named Andrei Rudenko, and the story is called Behind the Ukrainian Golden Toilet, because they were showing pictures of the places where this Mindik and some other people were sitting. And so his article is kind of a play on that nonsensical nonsense. And it's good stuff, because Putin today said something also pretty funny. So I'm going to share two short stories with you before we get into the 28-point peace plan, which apparently, like I surmised the last couple of days, is going to be forced upon the old Z monster, because he Maybe the old Trumpster did plan all of this. Maybe so. If so, maybe he'll get some due from me, especially if he sticks with his 28-point plan. And but let's get first to the story behind the Ukrainian golden toilet. There's only one way to fix the disease of the Ukrainian state. Written by a guy named Andrei Rudenko. And it's really not very long. I may skip around a little bit, but it's pretty funny. The West's slow turn away from Vladimir Zelensky is no longer a speculation. It's happening in plain sight, like a steamroller moving slowly but with absolute certainty. The Financial Times, hardly a Kremlin mouthpiece, has published a piece titled Bags of Cash and a Gold Toilet: The Corruption Crisis Engulfing Zelensky's Government. Its reporters now openly state that Ukrainian elites expect even more explosive revelations from the Naboo investigations. And once outlets like the Financial Times put something like this to print, it usually means the groundwork has been laid behind the scenes. That Western Europe and the United States are still approving new aid says little about confidence in Kiev. It says far more about bureaucratic inertia and the reluctance of those who profit from war to let the tap suddenly close. Even so, you can now hear cautious whispers in Brussels asking whether it makes sense to send billions to a government whose officials are determined to steal the money before it arrives. These are not new revelations. The only surprise is that anyone pretends to be surprised. The truth is simple. The West knew exactly who it was dealing with. Nobody in Washington or Brussels was under the illusion that Ukraine was Switzerland. They knowingly entered into a political partnership with what is and has long been one of the most corrupt and internally unstable political systems in Europe. To pretend otherwise is theater. For more than 30 years, Ukrainian statehood has rested on the same shaky foundation. Competing clans, oligarchy rule, privatized security services, and a political class willing to plunder their own population. Gee, this sounds like ours. Changing presidents never altered the underlying structure. Sounds like ours too, because each leader owed his position to the same network of cash, patronage, and force. Doesn't that sound like us? Take Leonid Kravchuk. Under him, Ukraine began to slow Banderization, and Banderovsky are the Nazis. While state assets were siphoned away and local power brokers entrenched themselves. Leonid Kuchma then perfected this system. Under his presidency, Ukraine saw dubious arms deals, the murder of journalists and opposition figures, and audio tapes revealing orders to eliminate critics. Economic sectors with predictable profits were carved up among regional clans who ruled their fiefdoms in exchange for loyalty, and a steady stream of kickbacks to Kiev. Viktor Yushchenko's years brought more of the same: corruption schemes around energy, political assassination, and the continued exploitation of ordinary Ukrainians. Viktor Yanukovych and Petro Poroshenko added their own layer to this architecture of rot. Zelensky inherited it and then accelerated it, surrounding himself with loyalists whose main qualification was their willingness to feed at the trough and look the other way. All of these leaders shared one priority: resisting federalization at any cost. A federal Ukraine would devolve power and financial control to the regions. And that is a nightmare scenario for Kiev elites. It would loosen their grip on revenue streams, limit their political leverage, and allow regional identities to express themselves without the fear of punishment from the center. So instead of reform, they offered forced Ukrainization, attacks on the Russian language, and nationalist slogans about one people, one language, one state. It was a political survival strategy, not a nation-building project. That is why changing presidents won't fix anything. Remove Zelensky, and you get another figure from the same system. Perhaps Zaluzhny, perhaps a recycled face from a previous era. The choreography will be identical, only the masks will change. The deeper problem is the structure of Ukrainian statehood itself. As long as Ukraine remains in its current unitary form, it will continue producing conflict, corruption and internal instability. War is not an aberration of such a system. It is an outcome. If the elites refuse to reform and the population has no means to compel them to do so, then the discussion must move beyond personalities. The uncomfortable truth is that the only lasting solution may be to abandon the current model of Ukrainian statehood altogether, because no cosmetic change will save a system designed from birth to decay. You got to admit that's a pretty harsh article by Mr. Andrei Rudenko. And, unfortunately, quite a bit is true. So, Putin has one other small part that that he talked about. There's a lot of talk about people abandoning Ukraine nowadays. Nordic nations say, Sweden says this, that the Ukraine burden is unsustainable. Poland is stirring war hysteria. Ukrainian murder plots using chemical weapons are foiled. Let's see. Quite a few. But let's quickly share with you this story about Ukraine being led by a criminal gang on golden putties, according to Putin. Ukrainian leaders do not care about the fate of their own country, the Russian president says. Ukrainian leaders have devolved into a criminal gang while sitting on their golden putties, Russian President Putin has said. The president made these remarks on Thursday while visiting a command post for troops fighting in the Ukraine conflict. In his address to the commanding officers, Putin touched upon a massive graft crisis that has been unfolding in Ukraine. This is not a political leadership of Ukraine. It is a criminal gang that holds power for personal enrichment. It's clear to everyone that these people, sitting on their golden potties, are hardly thinking about the fate of common people in Ukraine or the fate of ordinary soldiers, Putin stated, referring to Timur Mindik, the ally of Vladimir Zelensky, the one they call the wallet, who fled the country hours before he was due to be arrested for extortion, who had a gilded toilet in his elite Kiev apartment. The massive graft scandal unfolded in Ukraine last week. I'm not going to cover the rest of that. I've covered that for several days. Dmitry Peskov said, "The Kiev regime is obviously going off the rails," said Dmitry Peskov on Tuesday. "That's hardly a Ukrainian internal matter anymore. That's foreign money being stolen." So it's there's the tide is definitely turning, friends and neighbors. So when I first started reviewing the 28-point plan, I couldn't get to I couldn't find the full 28 paragraphs. I have them now. I have the complete list, which we'll go over with you in a little bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, the places that we've been talking about that are in Zaporizhia or in Kherson or what do you call it? The Donetsk, Lugansk in the Donbass area, because it is important. And I was saying, I was basically quizzing all of the videos that I watched and wondering what about the fall of Pokrovsk, and is Pokrovsk gone already or not? There's now been Western journalists and others go in, and there's plenty of videos of Russians and Russian soldiers all over southern Pokrovsk. So for the Zelensky regime to do what it's been doing and say, "Oh no, that's crazy," we have them. But on the ground inside of Pokrovsk, Russian sources, including the Ministry of Defense, are talking about Pokrovsk and Krasnoarmeysk as encircled and under Russian control, and say that Ukrainian forces are bottled up around Mirnograd. And those two cities are, I suppose you'd call them sister cities. They're not all that far apart from each other. The Russian Ministry of Defense video, geolocated by Reuters, shows Russian soldiers patrolling freely through the southern parts of the city and no visible Ukrainian presence. Ukraine calls this a gray zone, but that's usually the word you use when you're already in trouble, according to Reuters. Western military trackers ISW, Institute Study of War, have been noting for weeks that Russia has the initiative in Pokrovsk while Ukraine has severe manpower and munition problems. We've been following that here, yeah? In strict military terms, Russia has the momentum, the artillery, the numbers. Zelensky himself admits Ukrainian troops are badly outnumbered. Ukrainian reserves are thin. They have other fronts to hold in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, etc. So unless Kiev does one of two things, pulls out in time and trades land for saving troops, or somehow finds fresh forces and more ammo that nobody has available, then the loss of Pokrovsk is just a matter of time. It's not an if. From the Russian side of the equation, the battle is already being described in the past tense. And from most of the mappers, that's true. Even the Ukrainian mappers are showing 90% of Pokrovsk under Russian control. So from a political standpoint, nobody in Kiev is going to say Pokrovsk is gone until long after the map makes it obvious. But on an operational level, the city is doomed unless there's some kind of a miracle or political deal. And it appears that the political deal is going to kick their rear ends after I tell you about that little tidbit. So what we see is the U.S. reporting in live updates are describing Trump as frustrated with both sides. That's been going on for a while, but he's talking about lasting peace. He's more frustrated with the Z monster than he is with Putin. And he says that he's pushing for a lasting peace and pushing his 28-point plan, which we're going to get to, like I said. Russia, for their point, their officials are openly saying that the conflict is now Trump's, not Biden's. They've been saying that for a while. I've been saying that for a while. And that Moscow is ready to negotiate if Washington is serious. And Moscow hasn't slammed the 28-point draft. You know, their line is more like, we haven't confirmed it, but we are open to dialogue on it. So code and diplomacy, that means we can work with this with some edits. You know, they're still not quite there. And I don't, after reviewing it, I don't think they're going to be, but it'll be close. Trump keeps swinging between let Ukraine win everything back one day, and the next he's freeze the lines and give Russia the Donbass. Putin wants something closer to his original war aims. He wants recognition of Crimea. He wants the full Donbass. He wants a neutral Ukraine. He wants limits on Ukrainian military, no NATO. The new plan covers most of these things. So Trump's real impatience appears to be with Zelensky in Europe for not taking the deal immediately, and with the fact that he hasn't turned it into a quick win he can brag about. So Putin is being more hard-nosed business negotiator, pressure over tomahawks, sanctions, etc., pressure over energy, escalation, BRICS on the other. If you're looking for a headline, Trump isn't breaking with Putin. He's trying to arm twist Kiev and Brussels into swallowing a settlement that locks in Russian gains, but does let him claim that he ended the war. So that's a part of it. There's a bunch of stuff about tomahawks and giving more. Everybody's been talking about the other option would be to give Kiev all of this long-range equipment to continue bombing inside of Russia. But that's an escalation that is a very bad plan. And before we get to this 28-point plan, and I only say this because Trump is like, I don't know, a weather vane. You know, whichever way the wind blows today is the way he's pointing. And so, at least on the Ukraine conflict. And so we shall see. Let's talk about all of the times that, and most of this came from because Al Jazeera put together a pretty cool article. It's like, we don't know which way he's going either, and who knows if this new one will stick. It was an interesting article. I'm not going to share the whole thing with you. It's too long. But they talk about during his campaign and his early presidency. On the trail, he claimed he'd end the war in 24 hours. Later, he admitted that this was, according to Wikipedia anyway, creative marketing. And in February of 2025, he had an Oval Office meeting with Zelensky. Remember that? And that debacle. Public and leaked accounts described Trump scolding Zelensky for not being grateful. We saw that. And telling him is in no position to dictate terms, and implied that Ukraine needed to give up land. That was in February. In August, both sides have to cede some territory. Trump floated land swaps. Ukraine gives up territory. Russia gives back some smaller pieces. Everyone signs a ceasefire. That's from Reuters. And then Zelensky and European leaders immediately reject this idea. Ukraine's constitution, according to the Z-Monster, doesn't allow trading territory away. That was from the Washington Post. September the 23rd. Ukraine can win it all back. Do you remember that nonsense? Oh, Ukraine can win it all back. This is a new phase. After meeting Zelensky at the UN, Trump suddenly says Ukraine can reclaim all territory lost since 2022 with EU and NATO backing, and posts about returning to the original borders of where this war started. That was Reuters as well. That was a brief moment when his rhetoric lined up with more with Kiev and Brussels. Very, very small. In October, he then pivoted again, suggested freezing the war at the current front lines and leaving negotiations over status of occupied regions for later. Russia rejected this. It wants the full Donbass and some more. Okay. And then in November, this leaked 28-point plan, and we're to the end. And remember what comes tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 90-day end of when these sanctions are supposed to take place in India, China, bunch of other places that they were given a 90-day reprieve, right? Remember all of this? That these are going to be some serious sanctions that are supposed to take place tomorrow. If I do remember the date, right? This is cool. Let's see. But according to Axios, AP, plus the Al Jazeera article that I read, and there were plenty more that I listened to online and whatnot, Russia is getting what they will get. Okay, this is the leaked part of the 28-point plan. I have the full text of it below what they get, and I'll go through all 28. But Russia gets formal control of Crimea and all of the Donbass. Okay, including some of the areas it doesn't yet physically hold. They have all of Lugansk and almost all of Donetsk, but they will. The plan calls for Ukraine to give it all up, right? Then Ukraine pulls its forces out of the Donbass entirely, and the region becomes a demilitarized zone. Current front lines in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson are frozen, pending future talks. Ukrainian army is capped at 400,000 troops, according to Al Jazeera. It's 400 to 600, according to the 28-point plan and a couple other places, right? And they're stripped of any long-range strike capability. NATO enlargement is further constrained. There are strong hints of a block on Ukrainian membership. I think it's in there, actually. In return, the U.S. security guarantee for what's left of Ukraine and Europe, some kind of non-aggression arrangement and access to portions of the Russian frozen assets. This is interesting. So we'll get to that in just a second, because the way the finances come out, Trump's the God Emperor of the planet, right? This is good stuff, because I always thought I was the God Emperor of the planet, but apparently not. If you are into Frank Herbert, you will know that God Emperor is a title from his science fiction writings. Anyway, Russian news on this blunt, take from all of this is the plan meets many of Russia's core security demands, and it would force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereignty and territory, while the EU complains it has been kept in the dark, right? So if we strip away the noise from this, what do we get? We get a vague promise of quick peace and no details. We get experiments with different formulas, land swaps, total Ukraine. So if this is really Trump the deal maker and Trump posturing this entire time, going back and forth and quietly working with the Russians, I wonder. I truly wonder, because if it ends up this way, then that sounds pretty likely that he was doing something along there. But I don't know. Maybe somebody who is a Trumpster, not that I'm not a supporter, but a Trumpster backer far more than me, to 100 to 110% when I'm only a 70 to 80%. Maybe they would know. But now we got a fairly concrete scheme that looks pretty close to what Russia said early on in the war. What? This is the the Istanbul Plus concept that was rejected by Boris Johnson way back when, and the Biden administration. Nonsense. And so what have we done except kill off 1 million Ukrainians and a good number of Russians? I don't believe it's anywhere near as high, but, I may be wrong in that respect, but I doubt it. So this is an American guarantee. And so the story from the Russian point of view is that Washington spent 3 years denying Moscow's red lines, and now it's trying to sell those exact same red lines back to Ukraine and Europe as Trump's peace plan. This is the Trump peace plan. Kiev and the EU will almost certainly reject the initial draft, which is why even Western analysts are calling it more of a starting gun for a diplomatic blame game than a finished settlement. If they say no, Trump gets to say, I offered peace and they chose more war. So there were some good stories on that. Reuters said that, shows the Russian soldiers walking freely through Pokrovsk. Al Jazeera says Ukraine facing exhausting battles in Zaporizhia and Donetsk. And then Russia hitting Ukraine with overnight attacks happens every single night. So I went and I listened to one of my favorites over there, the Solovyov. I listened to a 2.5 hour Maria Zakharova, she gave her Ministry of Foreign Affairs briefing, and I listened to that, most of it. And then there's some stuff about Kellogg and his retiring at the end of the year, like I was telling you last night. We're talking about Istanbul Plus. There's a guy named Mercouris, Alex, that I like to listen to. And I have the full text of Trump's 28 points that came out on Axios earlier, and Al Jazeera that I read to you about. And then, so I'm going to start with the plan itself, and then about how it's being used to squeeze the Z monster, then go with the strict Russian side of it, and then talk about some more middle of the roaders, right? If you strip down what the 28-point plan actually says, let's see. You know what? I think I'll take you through all 28. I wasn't going to, but I think I will. Let's see here. According to Axios, here it is. Short version, okay, because they had a little bit more in there. But we are to confirm that Ukraine stays sovereign as a state. Okay, that's number one. There will be a non-aggression pact between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe that closes out all past disputes. Russia pledges no invasions. NATO halts further expansion. Gee, there's a surprise. Maybe we put that into a treaty. Number 4, U.S. mediated NATO-Russia security dialogue to manage tension and de-escalation. Very nice. U.S.-led security guarantees for Ukraine. Cap Ukraine's armed forces at 600,000. There's something in the calculations in there, but it's a administrative versus fighting forces, stuff like that. So it's basically 400 ground troops or whatever. Ukraine is locked out of NATO in its own constitution, and NATO formally rules out Ukraine's membership. That's number 7. Number 8, no NATO troops in Ukraine. That'd be a good one. That's what started all this crap anyway. Number 9, base European fighter jets in Poland instead. Poland's already a bunch of nuts. Let's let them be there. Number 10, details of the U.S. guarantee. U.S. gets money. They get a lot of money. The guarantee is void if Ukraine attacks Russia or hits Moscow, St. Petersburg, and, quote, without cause. And if Russia attacks again, sanctions and recognition benefits snap back. So there's going to be recognition of the territories, and we'll get to that in a second. Number 11, open the EU door for Ukraine, plus temporary preferential access to EU markets. Number 12, this one is where Trump is hoping to shine, right? Big reconstruction package for Ukraine. New development fund, joint work on gas infrastructure, rebuilding of cities and infrastructure, and resource extraction. Number 13, reintegrate Russia into the global economy. Staged sanctions relief, long-term U.S.-Russia economic deals, and invite Russia back into the G8. If Trump is behind this, he is trying to slam the door on BRICS and bring Russia back into SWIFT. That makes sense, too. And get number 14. You're going to love this. Trump and the deal maker. Use frozen Russian assets. $100 billion goes to a U.S.-led Ukraine rebuild fund, and the U.S. gets 50% of the profits. Do you remember that? We get that anyway because Ukraine signed the minerals deal. Remember that? And or that's part of it. And then Europe has to add another $100 billion to the pot. And the remaining frozen assets go into a joint U.S.-Russia investment fund. So the U.S. gets 3 chunks of money. $100 billion, and then whatever the rest is. There was $300 billion in the original fund, right? And who knows how much is left these days, but all the interest on it has gone to loans to Ukraine to guarantee them. He wants to create a joint U.S.-Russia security working group to oversee compliance. I want in on that. You know, that would be fun. Number 16, Russia writes a non-aggression toward Europe and Ukraine into its law. I don't think that'll be a problem at all. Number 17, extend and update U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control treaties. That's a big deal. That's the New START treaty. Number 18, Ukraine recommits to being a non-nuclear state under the nuclear proliferation treaties. Number 19, and I've talked about this quite a few times, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant restarts under IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. Electricity is split 50-50 between Russia and Ukraine. So you've heard some of these before over the last 5-6 months, right? And now we're seeing them all put together. Number 20, tolerance and rights package. Both adopt education programs on tolerance. Ukraine applies EU rules on religious and linguistic rights that they don't have right now. Both protect Russian Ukrainian media and education. They ban, well, Ukraine anyway, bans this Nazi ideology and related activity. 21, the territories. Here's the land. Crimea, Lugansk, Donetsk, recognized as Russian, including by the United States. Kherson and Zaporizhia, the borders freeze along the current front lines. Russia quits some other occupied pockets in Sumy and Kherson, places like that. Or Kharkiv, in Kharkiv, places like that. And Ukraine withdraws from the west or from the rest of Donetsk that it still holds, which become a neutral, demilitarized buffer recognized as Russian territory, but no Russian troops inside that strip. Both sides, 22, promise not to change these borders by force. Security guarantees vanish if they do. Number 23, guarantee Ukraine's use of the Dnieper River and Black Sea grain export routes, because they're about to lose, possibly, access to the Black Sea, which kill them financially in a lot of ways. Number 24, this one's fun. Or no, where is it? Because, well, we'll get into some more details after I go through these last 5. Humanitarian Commission, all for all, prisoner of war and body swaps. Return of any civilian detainees or children, family reunification, and victim support measures. 25, this is a big one. Ukraine to hold elections within 100 days. Want to talk about corruption there? Number 26, full wartime amnesty for everyone. No future claims or complaints allowed, meaning Russia and all the people that it is charging under criminal law, like I've told you about repeatedly, they don't get, that doesn't happen anymore. 27, make the deal legally binding, enforced by a peace council. Get this, here it comes, chaired by Donald Trump himself, with sanctions for violators. And number 28, ceasefire begins immediately once everyone signs and troops pull back to the initial agreed upon positions. That is all 28, friends and neighbors. And that's a hell of a start, don't you think? That's a big fargan deal if the old Trumpster can pull it off. So, stripped down, this security architecture in NATO, Ukrainian sovereignty is affirmed, but Ukraine has to constitutionally renounce NATO. NATO has to formally record that Ukraine will never be admitted. NATO cannot station troops in Ukraine. Airfields, nothing. U.S.-mediated Russia-NATO dialogue is created to end ambiguity and to de-escalate. And that'll be chaired by the old Trumpster. I kind of like that idea. In other words, Ukraine is permanently non-aligned and off of the NATO expansion menu, which is what Moscow has wanted from day one. Ukraine's military and status, that's another chunk of them, right? Ukrainian armed forces capped. Axios says 600,000 as a hard ceiling, but a lot of the other ones are saying, they have to have the current force, which is about 800K. So the numbers don't quite line up, but the direction is a huge cut. And Ukraine has to give up certain classes of long-range weapons. There's going to be no ATACMS, no Tomahawk style, no Storm Shadows, no nothing like that. Ukraine has to stay non-proliferation. They can't have any nuclear-related stuff. And so from a practical point of view, it's an army large enough for internal security, but not large enough to threaten any deep strikes on Russia. The territories we've laid out before. And Crimea, Donetsk, Lugansk recognized as Russian, even in the U.S. And then the other ones are just hypothetical future talks. You can talk about them. And Ukraine has to withdraw from, Donetsk. We've already talked about that. So here is, this is where it's interesting. So you want to talk about the Biden family making a buttload of cash in Ukraine. Let's switch to the Trump-Kushner angle, right? And who gets a cut now? $100 billion in frozen assets, Russian assets, get to be used in a U.S.-led reconstruction fund. U.S. gets 50% of the profits from that. Europe is supposed to add another $100 billion, and the rest of the Russian funds go into the U.S. joint investment. And what are they going to do with this? Allegedly, AI, Arctic minerals, energy building, infrastructure, stuff like that. And Russia gets to come back home, right? Lift sanctions, long-term economic cooperation with the U.S. in energy, resources, and tech, and invited back to the G8. And Ukraine gets to join the EU, right? So from a Russian point of view, Washington tries to turn Russian assets into a Wall Street profit machine and bolt Russia back into the globalist system in exchange for giving them territory and ending the war and lifting sanctions. They get to come back in. I wonder how China and India will feel about that. Frankly, Europe and Ukraine aren't going to go for this anyway, and so Trump can just wash his hands from it and go, well, I've done my best. Here it is. No, what do you call it? Pulitzer for you. Is it Pulitzer? What is it? Nobel. I'm sorry. Nobel Peace Prize for you. But there you go. And then there's a bunch of fluff. Body exchanges, elections, full amnesty, blah, blah, blah. Peace Council with Donald Trump guaranteeing enforcement. So from the Washington / Trump camp, Axios, Wall Street Journal, all say this is Trump's serious, fully fleshed out plan, drafted by Witkoff with input from Rubio and Kushner in consultation with Kirill Dmitriev, Russian. Remember when he came over a little bit ago, a month ago, less than that. U.S. officials say it's not easy for Ukraine, but they insist that if Kiev refuses, it will lose even more land. And that's true. They'll be lucky to have any Black Sea access if they don't end, because Russia's moving. Well, Zelensky is being caught, let's call it nudged toward reality. He's got to get toward reality. And publicly, they get to say, we're ending the war. There's going to be durable peace, security guarantees, the usual sugar coating on what is basically a dictated settlement to the old Z monster. So basically everyone that I've seen on the West is echoing exactly this point. And then the unfortunate point for this is that what this proposal is the same thing that Moscow demanded a long time ago, and what Zelensky has already called capitulation, but Washington is now reselling it as Trump peace. But it also says that Zelensky's corruption scandal in this battlefield, losses that are going on now aren't helping him any. So in Moscow, on the other hand, Peskov is being cool, says Kremlin hasn't seen any new terms of any new plan. Nothing beyond our earlier talks. Putin's June 24 terms still stand. NATO renunciation, withdrawal from the 4 regions, blah, 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 same old stuff. Zakharova today, and in TASS and Al Jazeera, They say that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is aware of media speculation but has not received any official U.S. proposal, and that such things must go through official channels and not leaks. Unofficially, Russian TV and Russian, what do you call it? Vkontakte and RuTube, all of them. I watched one called in Russian, of course, but the peace plan from 28 points. This is a great roasting. The path to the White House. They frame it as, get this, a desperate PR move by Trump after he has taken a few domestic political hits. Epstein hearings, congressional moves that have been against him. It's an attempt to turn Ukraine into a bargaining chip to save Trump politically. And this guy's pretty pro-Ukrainian, by the way. And a plan that is actually very favorable to Russia on the ground, but they're trying to sell it as balanced. Okay, this guy's the one I'm telling you about is a very Ukrainian point of view. Russian commentators say the plan codifies Russian gains, forces Ukraine to disarm, and gives Russia a path back to the G8 financial system without conceding anything fundamental. And Solovyov, the guy who watched that has the very political commentators, he says that this is proof that the West is exhausted and that Ukraine has already been defeated militarily. And the 28 points are clumsy and a late recognition of something that they already offered and had on the table and partially agreed to in Istanbul in 2022 until Bojo destroyed it. If this had happened, it would have, this is similar to what they agreed upon way back then. And there's a written part of it that goes with it. So what does Kiev say about all of this? Kiev, of course, says Ukrainian officials are calling this absurd. It's a non-starter. We're not going to capitulate, especially the parts about giving up the remaining parts of the Donbass and freezing the lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia, cutting its army, and giving Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church official status again. That is nonsense. That they're saying we will not give Russian language and the Moscow Church, the Orthodox Church, official status. Isn't that crap? And what did Zelensky say about this publicly? He didn't denounce it outright, but he says it's called the U.S. vision. He claims he will give it his input and stresses that American leadership has to remain strong to end the war. He's in trouble politically, huge, and he's trying to walk a line. He won't swallow this openly, but he ain't going to defy Trump openly either. So this, a lot of commentators, especially the Alex Mercouris that I like to listen to, the British guy, he has had an article. If you get a chance, you could get on YouTube and watch what he had. He has one that says, that was titled today, Kiev defeats force the U.S. U-turn. And they want to force Kiev to accept Istanbul Plus. And he talked about Kellogg quitting too. But basically his point, and mine too, is that the 28-point plan is really Istanbul Plus. This is what they had in 2022. After Ukraine's failed offensive and continued losses, the U.S. is U-turning and accepting Moscow's core demands because the battlefield is forcing somebody to accept reality. And I don't know why they haven't yet anyway. But, here we are still funding a losing war. Nonsense. But that's our history, right? Kellogg has quit going to Kiev. He's done with that. And he's symbolizing that the U.S. team itself knows they can't sell unlimited war to Congress anymore. What are the Europeans crying about now? Let's listen to them whine. They are angry because they were cut out of the negotiation. Well, I don't know that there really was any, but there are claims that Russia was involved in this with Witkoff and a couple others. The plan makes no demands of Russia, according to them, and is heavily tilted toward Russia, and tells Europe to live with a truncated Ukraine and a renormalized Russia. The Europeans are worried they'll be left holding the security bag if U.S. attention moves on, with Trump acting as a peace council boss while the EU pays the reconstruction bill and absorbs a broken client state. They're the ones that want the broken client state. We don't want them, but I don't. I think it's nonsense. So Mearsheimer, I think he's a professor, but he has one. It's called Ukraine and Reality, right? He says several points. He said and I know he's been saying it for years because I followed him for a long time. He's been saying for years that the West pushed Ukraine into an unwinnable war by promising what it could not deliver. Now, how can anybody deny that these days? You just can't. And never should have been denied it in the first place. And anybody in arms control knew that's exactly what we're doing. Anybody in the Pentagon that didn't know that was being paid to look the other way or paid to say the other version of that. That's it. They're not experts. They're people who are just morons, because anybody with even a small amount of experience in this area knows that what we were doing was pushing toward war. We know it. I mean, it's been going on for 30 years, for God's sake. So now the U.S. is walking Ukraine back toward the very deal it could have had in 2022, but at a much higher price tag in land and blood. Yep. The basic thesis is this isn't really peace. It's the formalization of a strategic defeat for Kiev and a major blow to Western credibility. What else could it be? This is what it is. And if you aren't acknowledging that, you don't know anything. So, I mean, that's the truth. We pushed them towards this, and it was unwinnable from the get-go. From the jump, they couldn't win this. And certain, but everybody's still saying the same crap that people were saying about Russia in the 80s when they didn't have the money, when they didn't have the technology, when they didn't have the manufacturing capability, when they didn't have any of that, and the Soviet Union was collapsing, and all Reagan had to do was push on them. They still think it's the same place over there. That's the problem. You have idiots running the show because it's not the same place that it was 30, 35 years ago. It's just not. So how is this plan going to be used by the old Trumpster to force Zelensky's hand? Let's get to it. How is he going to force it, and what does it mean for the war? I think, as I said earlier in the show, that Pokrovsk is gone. The military pressure, the Russian advances near Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, Siversk are inevitable. Those cities are Russian. The end. Move along smartly. The many analysts expect Pokrovsk. I say 90% of it's already gone. Solovyov opened his show talking about body exchange. This was, and I may have said something about this a few days ago. Ukraine received 1,000 bodies from Russia, more than 1,000 the other day, and Russia got back 30 bodies, right? Contrast this with Kiev claiming, and remember, they call Russians orcs, right, from Tolkien, and they've been saying for years, we're killing orcs by the thousands, right? Yeah. Really? Where are they? Where are they? This is exactly the kind of reality check that undermines Zelensky at home and abroad. The families see the corpses, not the telegram, videos of some idiot, saying we're killing people. So the message from Washington to the old Z monster is you're losing ground and men. If you refuse this, you're going to lose more ground and more men. And don't expect us to keep funding another grand offensive. That'll never get anywhere and never take place anyway, because the money will be snatched by your corrupt government or actors in the corrupt government, right? The financial and political choke is, this choke chain on the leash of the old Z-man is U.S. and EU money are conditional, allegedly. Trump can throttle the aid, and Congress is in no mood for another blank check, although they've still been trying to hide it and get some more in there. So everybody's talking about fatigue, corruption, running out of men, low morale, Western exhaustion. That's what's going on. The plan offers Zelensky some things, though. Security guarantees. He'll have those. And he can have elections in 100 days and claim that he delivered peace. He can take a victory lap if he wants. Yeah? Maybe? And he gets a butt ton of reconstruction money. Although the U.S. gets a lot of the profit. And the reconstruction money is going to be just as corrupt as all the rest. So you'll see some gains over there. But you'll see a lot of oligarchs, running off to the U.S. with new piles of money, too. Because that's the way it is over there. But, Zelensky does have a gun to his head. If he refuses this and the war drags on, he becomes the man that said no to peace and lost more land after that. So what about the blame game? What about information? Al Jazeera predicts the plan is being rolled out in a way that sets up a blame trap. Here it goes. You leak it to Axios. You leak it to the Financial Times. And so you leak part of it to Al Jazeera. So here, and you leak it like this. Here's a comprehensive U.S. plan, Trump's plan, that even Russia likes. Well, of course, it gives Russia all the crap it said it wanted. And then you signal even worse, anonymous sources and public comments that Zelensky must accept difficult concessions and that the U.S. is doing its part, meaning forcing him to do something. So, this is the trap. If Kiev and Europe say no, Trump can say at home, and talking to other people who are looking to get elected this year on the Republican side, he can say, while campaigning for them, that we brought a serious plan and even the Russians would sign it, and Ukraine refused. Ukraine is keeping the war going, right? This is exactly what it is. It's a PR move designed to shift the narrative away from Trump and into the unreasonable Ukrainians and EU, which is where it belongs anyway. So, that's the plan. That's the, if you want to call it Russian disinformation, but this time it's coming from somewhere else. Maybe we should talk about Al Jazeera disinformation or anywhere else. Where else does it come from? Axios disinformation, right? Well, what about the legality of these personal safety guarantees? Amnesty isn't just for Russians. It'll protect a bunch of Ukrainian officials and commanders and oligarchs who've made their fortunes on this war. They are rich, and it'll offer a clean exit for Zelensky and his circle. No investigations, no tribunals, no who stole what. They can then get to their post-war theft and politics or exile, and they can join something else. So the other lever is sign this and you're safe. Refuse, and when this does collapse, you might not be so lucky. You might be targeted for being thrown in prison, right? So what would this mean for the war itself? I mean, seriously. If this thing or something like it is forced through, what do we get? What does anybody get? What does the world finally get? Russia gets formal recognition of its territorial gains and locks in the land corridor to Crimea plus the full Donbass, which is theirs anyway. Ukraine is shrunk, permanently non-aligned, a demilitarized buffer. Call it Ukraine minus. Moscow gets sanctions relief, reintegration, and they never have to admit defeat or wrongdoing. I don't think they've been defeated. I mean, why would they have to admit defeat? They've won. And the wrongdoing? I wonder if you can really call it wrongdoing myself. What about Ukrainian wrongdoing? What about Western wrongdoing? What about European and U.S. wrongdoing? Where's the chemical weapons discussion? Where's the building up of Ukraine into the attack dog for the West? Where's all that? The front line becomes the de facto new border. So the line of contact in Kherson, Zaporizhia, the Dnieper River, which, I think I may have said that. They're going to get to the Dnieper River. And they didn't get all the way to the north part of the Dnieper, but they're at the Dnieper River. And they have a demilitarized strip, in an area in the Donbass. Any attempt by Ukraine to later change this voids the U.S. security guarantees. That's it. But the conflict doesn't disappear. It freezes, right? So you can expect probably low-level guerrilla attacks, sabotage, terrorism on both sides, intelligence war between the two, constant arguments over implementation, elections, language, church statuses, minority rights, that type of thing. But the large-scale conventional phase of the war would be over because Ukraine is physically unable to sustain it. If Trump can pull this off, he's really doing Ukraine a favor, right? This victory comes with a Western stamp, with a Trump stamp. Moscow's early conditions can be written up as Trump's peace vision, even though they're all Russia's peace vision and have been for a long time. And the U.S. gets money, and they get to use that money and legal instruments to lock in peace and money. So, I don't know. I find it pretty interesting. They talked about in a lot of these the emotional angle, the Ukrainian families that are missing bodies, and don't know what they are. They finally get to know about it. The myth of the Western wonder weapons is gone. People know that's nonsense. 4 ATACMs all get shot down. They mock the Ukrainian general staff statements and Western media hypes of all the German Leopard tanks, the U.S. Bradley fighting vehicles, the U.S. Abrams tanks destroyed. You don't hear anything about that anymore, do you? You don't hear anything about it. None of them exist. They're gone. And have been for a year. I saw something 3-4 months ago, I think, is the last I saw of a Bradley fighting vehicle. Where are they? When's the last time you heard about an F-16 over there? Crazy stuff. Let's see. How did he put it? He put a loud laughs about Western media around so-called the existence of a plan of the U.S. in Ukraine. Western media noise over a supposed U.S. plan. And they are skeptical that this is really on paper yet, with Axios has been the only ones to leak it. He says, all of them on that Solovyov Live said, the West knows Ukraine is beaten. They know it. The Americans are looking for an exit, and Kiev is being lined up to take the blame if they refuse. Well, they have been to blame for the last, quite a few months. They haven't even seriously considered any sort of peace option, not remotely. They've denied since at least June, if not before that. Remember when Istanbul started up again? And they, the Russians have been saying we've been waiting for them to get back with us with some new talking points. We all said where we were going to go and that we'd meet again in a couple of weeks. Never happened. These narratives about Pokrovsk in the front line, Russia is grinding forward all over the front lines. And Ukraine is out of men, running out of ammo, and everybody's admitting this. The Russians are winning slowly on the ground, and the U.S. is looking for diplomacy now to cover the fact that they were beaten again. That the West has been beaten again, right? What did Zakharova say in her briefing today? Her briefing covered a ton of ground, though. She covered Lavrov's schedule, Belarus, Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian civilians in Belgorod and Kursk areas, strikes on Novovoronezh, a nuclear power plant again. So they're the Ukrainians are still trying to force some kind of a big blow up at some nuclear power plants. All of them, Volgograd 2 and Voronezh, including the Novovoronezh nuclear power plant. That's bad stuff, and the kids are getting killed. She talks about that. She said the Kievian neo-Nazis continue to attack civilian targets and terrorizing peaceful population, is how she put it. And her position, or what she talked about as far as the 28-point peace plan, she said that she was actually covered in two different places, one on TASS and one in her briefing, right? And Moscow has seen numerous media reports describing the various points of this plan, but no official proposal has been received. And that such issues have to go through official channels, not media. And Russia's hands are clean. They get to look constructive and cautious, and say, we'll deal with it if it ever shows up. But in a later part of her briefing, she said that they want, for sure, they must have the sovereign equality of states, respect for civilizational diversity, and the variety of cultures, Russian and Ukrainian. And Western attempts to impose their own order versus sanctions and military blockades have been wrong from the jump, she says. And she links U.S. sanctions plans, even now, against Russia's trading partners back to Trump. It says destructive for global economic stability. So while the Western media is spinning Trump's 28-point vision, Zakharova tells everybody Russia hasn't received a thing. Kiev is still using Western weapons to hit civilians and nuclear infrastructure. So she is doubtful. That is doubtful from her point of view, I would think. So how do you think they're going to sell this or force it upon them? how is it? I don't know. I'm not so positive that it's going to be such a hard sell because Ukraine's losing. I mean, they're losing bad. And they were talking, Zelensky was talking several days ago that he needs 40,000 a month people, new soldiers, 40,000 a month. If they were winning, why would they need that many? They wouldn't. They would, because if they're getting killed that quickly, that they need 40,000 more, it is not going well. It is just not going well at all. So, I don't know. This is, what would the security look for? We don't know how that would look, the security lines. I think that it's probably not going to... I'm interested to see the reactions on there. Supposedly, we were going to get some new opinions on it, but I haven't seen anything new. Although sometimes this late at night, you'll get some new articles that are put out for the morning, but there's nothing there. It's there's no new good stuff that's come out. I did want to get into what is going on with the Baltic Sea right now that is kind of distressing, because this is all part of it in this confrontation zone, because NATO is doing all kinds of this is when the Maria Zakharova was talking about it too. So she says NATO has turned the Baltic Sea into an area of more and more military confrontation. And she says the bloc is unwilling to discuss de-escalation. It's going to have to be Trump that does it, I guess. Her remarks come amid rising anti-Russian discussions in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which are, I reported from Lithuania back in, September, and they are very, angry. You're an angry little elf, aren't you? Well, they're all angry little elves in Lithuania. I tell you what, they're just angry little people. And Zakharova said the region has long been a space of trade and peaceful cooperation, but it's being dismantled by NATO's military buildup. This part of Europe, she says, has been turned into a zone of confrontation, which sharply escalated as a result of Finland and Sweden joining the bloc, the NATO bloc. This is what she said yesterday. So she pointed out that NATO's 2025 launch of what they called Baltic Sentry in an attempt to impose new navigation rules and turn the sea into the bloc's internal waters. She says those are doomed to fail, and she insists that Russia will remain a full-fledged member of the Baltic community. So this Baltic Sentry project, they call it critical. They say they're protecting critical undersea infrastructure after recent incidents. Remember when they were saying that there were communication lines, cables that were destroyed? What about Nord Stream 2 getting destroyed, right? And so there's been a big buildup in NATO there. It's very difficult to see any potential for dialogue, they're all saying, aimed at reducing tensions. And NATO countries are not showing any openness to honest discussion on ways to de-escalate, says Zakharova. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania adopt an increasingly confrontational stance. Officials like Andrius Kubilius, who's a former Lithuanian prime minister, continue to invoke an alleged Russian threat to justify much higher military spending. Kubilius warned this week of a possible conflict with Russia within 2 to 4 years. They all keep talking about it, meaning this is what they want, right? Moscow has rejected claims of any hostile intent, of course, denounces what it calls the West's reckless militarization, and Zakharova stresses that Russia will use all available legal means to safeguard its own national security interests. Same thing you heard in Ukraine. So, even if we get rid of Ukraine, does it mean we got to start all over again? Who's going to jump then and blame it on Russia? I mean, this whole war has been blamed on Russia, right? Crazy stuff. Reuters has said that Washington is demanding that Kiev accept the U.S. drafted peace plan. So they're not allegedly not giving Ukraine any choice. They must accept. So that plan, the 28 points that we went over at length, Reuters is quoting anonymous sources saying that Washington wants Kiev to accept the main points. They just got to accept. Axios, Financial Times, who else? Everybody is now saying it. Claim that the document stipulates recognizing Russian as an official language in Ukraine. Crazy stuff. I can't imagine they're going to do it. I can't believe. I think this is going to be a big no-go. The EU has already rejected it. The genius, Kaja Kallas, she's on the front page of an article, right? European Union is pushing back against the latest U.S. proposed plan, saying the settlement must reflect positions of Brussels. Yeah, why? What does Brussels have to do with it? Nothing. So, in my opinion, who gives a crap? The fact is, you can bring Ukraine into the EU all you want, but if you want NATO, good luck. U.S. won't let them in. I think the old Trumpster may have said that now in this 28-point plan. The Western media is claiming was developed in coordination with Moscow, but not the EU. So we've already told about it. President Trump is supposed to, well, according to Zelensky anyway, he says he hopes to speak with U.S. President Donald Trump in the coming days, is what he says. We shall have to see. Kaja Kallas says that any peace arrangement has to reflect the positions of both the bloc, the EU, and Ukraine, and says that the U.S. proposal offered no concessions from the Russian side. Well, I didn't see a whole lot there on the Russian side either, except the freaking money you guys have been trying to steal from them for years. The $300 billion that are in Brussels in a bank. And Trump's trying to take it all too. Trump's after the money. So French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot, I don't know if you pronounced the T or not, was quoted by Reuters as saying that any agreement must not amount to capitulation. What else you got? If you guys aren't willing to go in there and fight, which you're not, and Russia would bomb the snot out of you if you did, then what is left? Ukraine doesn't have any ability to win this war. That isn't going to change. It hasn't changed in 4 years, and it's not going to change now unless, what are you going to do? Go nuclear? You want to go nuclear on this, you morons? Bad plan for all of us if you do, idiots. And there are other ministers that have said they haven't seen the document and would need clarification. Well, geez, the only way you can get it is to read Axios. Who gets it? How does it get around there? Great government working, huh? Moscow has always said that the EU is obstructing U.S. and Russian diplomatic efforts to get rid of the conflict. Instead, they're working to prolong the hostilities, and they're still doing the same thing. This is the next open-ended pledge of support financially, politically, and corruption also. You support their corruption if you don't take care of this problem. And so Russia's calling it like it is, right? And according to Germany's Kiel Institute, the EU has committed $75 billion in aid to Ukraine since 2022. We've done a hell of a lot more than that, under the Biden bloc, right? Kremlin remains open to peace, but says Kiev is only seeking to keep the fighting going on. That's true. Lavrov had an interesting appearance today, and he said, well, it wasn't today, it was actually a couple of days ago, but he said that EU nations are trying to elbow their way into the Ukrainian peace process, despite their openly hostile stance toward Russia. That's what he said. Speaking at an embassy roundtable on Wednesday, Lavrov said that the EU countries are clearly trying, quite brazenly, to reclaim a place at the negotiating table. But the minister said they have no business there. The bloc, he said, maintains a position of revanchism, of inflicting strategic defeat upon Russia, while debating potential troop deployment to Ukraine in case of a ceasefire. Of course, there is no place for it or them at the negotiating table. Moscow has consistently opposed deployment of Western troops. Yep. He said that, everybody has said for a long time that if there were Western or NATO troops, they're all legitimate military targets that get there. Lavrov noted that both the EU and Kiev are seeking to convince Trumpster to abandon his push to settle the conflict and relapse into a standoff with Russia. He said, everybody else wants, essentially, to turn Biden's war into Trump's war, right? That's what Lavrov said. No, I've said it already is Trump's war. So, but he pointed out that Trump has been seeking to mediate an end to the conflict, and he spearheaded, decent amount of discussions. I mean, what's he done? He's done more than anybody else. It just hasn't been successful. And I've always said he's just going to have to force this or cut off Ukraine. And I think maybe he's listening. Maybe he is listening to the people like me that have been right from the get-go. Did you guys hear that Stephen King's book, It, was pulled from shelves in Russia? Now, I'm not sure I care about this one. I've read It. I watched it on television. I didn't like the new one. It's too horrifying for me. But the old one was not too bad. What was it, a TV miniseries or something? But Stephen King has been very, very anti-Russia. I don't think the guy knows what he's talking about as far as this. He should stick to... I listened to a few of his rants in the beginning of all of this the beginning of the horror story was he was talking about Ukraine being so positive and nothing but negative about Russia. He's nuts. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But he says his books were pulled, and the story goes, it has been pulled from sales in Russian bookstores and online marketplaces, according to Russian media reports on Thursday. This just happened. And I don't get it, because I've read this book, but it was a while ago. And it says one of his most popular works that was published in 1986, It, contains a controversial set of content, including a scene widely described as an orgy involving minors and characters with non-traditional sexual orientations. I don't remember this at all in it. And I'd have to go back and find it, I suppose. But Russia has banned content that promotes same-sex relations in 2022. Although there's no official blacklist of prohibited literature, that's not the state's business over there, but a major retailer removed more than 250 books in 2024, including some of Stephen King's. So, Russia's leading publisher, AST, told the Business Daily, Vidyamosty, that it had temporarily withdrawn King's book, It, in order to update product marking issues, which is a reference to age restriction and content warning labels required under Russian law. So, AST has long sold It with a 16-plus age label, but it says that there was something containing an LGBT-related theme, so that it had to be an 18-plus instead of a 16-plus book, right? And bookstores in Russia are freaking fantastic. You know, I've gone into a bunch of them. Books are cheap, and they're everywhere. And I mean, it's like it used to be here. I mean, the bookstores are. I love it over there. When going to all these bookstores, there are tons of them. But and you see these labels on them that say 16 plus, 18 plus, you know, whatever. But they have a store called Wildberries. I've told you about that before. And it says that it complies with legislation, does not allow the sale of products prohibited in Russia. But I don't think that it has anything like that in there. Maybe somebody could remind me if that was the case, but I really don't think so. And I'd have to check it out. But hear about this. King he ceased working with his Russian publishers in March of 2022. After, well, remember the escalation of the Ukraine conflict started, you know, when they went up. That started in February 2022. And he has actively supported Kiev in the ongoing conflict and accuses Russian forces, he has done it many times, of killing civilians. But he doesn't ever say anything about the other way around. I'm not saying that there aren't errors on both sides, but I think there's some intentional ones on the Ukrainian side. And I haven't seen very many of those, if any, at all, on the Russian side. So I'd challenge that guy to get his story straight and do a little bit of research or quit talking about it, because there's plenty of those stories on the other side, tons of them. And it seems to me that the more famous you are, the more you like to take these stories and twist them. Something else just came out not too long ago that talks about, in the last couple of minutes, Ukrainian MPs are publishing the terms of the new peace deal too. They say they got a draft from the U.S. and are ready to discuss it. And so Ukrainian opposition leader Alexei Goncharenko, he published the text of the plan presented to Kiev by the U.S. administration, and he posted it on the social media, which are screenshots of the Ukrainian language electronic document that detailed the 28-point plan. So in the full text, he said he put every bit of it out there, all 28 points in Ukrainian. And so it's listed. His post is out here. I had to translate it, but it's definitely out here. So it was posted for them, it's now early morning, but before the evening last night, he put it out as well. So it came out. It came out about probably 6-7 p.m. Ukraine time. So there you have it. We shall see what'll happen on this, and it'd be nice to get some peace in the world, wouldn't it? Regardless, I mean, geez, this escalation or de-escalation needs to occur, and I'd be happy to see it. This is my last show of the week, and I'll be traveling for the holidays, so there may be a little bit of problems on my ability to, although I'm going to try Sunday night, my show. I know I'm traveling on that day, and I'm going to, if I have any troubles, I'll keep you posted, but I think we'll have a show all ready to go. In the meantime, I hope you do listen to my show at internationalflavor.com for all past shows, and this one will be there in a little bit. Have a very good night.